A massive storm rips through Redfield County in the dead of night, leaving a stranded woman alone on a flooded back road. Out of the darkness, a farmer appears, offering shelter in his worn-down truck. But neither suspects the other's secret that she's a powerful CEO on the run from her own corporate empire, and he's just days away from losing the family land he's worked his entire life. Through pounding rain and flash-flooded fields, they form a bond that grows stronger as the tension between them escalates. Will their trust survive once the truth is revealed? To find out how this unlikely alliance battles both nature and a ruthless corporate agenda, you'll want to experience every twist in this powerful story. And if you enjoy tales of resilience, friendship, and redemption, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss another captivating story, and you'll be supporting our journey to bring you more unforgettable narratives. Ethan Hayes never quite got used to the hush of an empty house. At 62, he had grown accustomed to the rhythms of rural life, crows announcing dawn, the lowing of cattle awaiting their feed, and the gentle hum of wind through the distant pines. What he couldn't get accustomed to was the silence once the sun went down. He often sat alone in the parlor of his century-old farmhouse, its wooden floors creaking beneath his worn boots, sifting through photographs that told the story of all that had come before. The house had belonged to his parents and grandparents before them, each leaving behind layers of memories embedded in every scratch along the walls, every squeaky step on the staircase. Now, those memories felt like ghosts. He'd been just a teenager when he enlisted for Vietnam. The war ended by the time he finally got there, but he stayed on base for years as a mechanic, tinkering with engines and building up a knack for fixing anything that sputtered. When Ethan returned stateside, he found his parents older and the farm in need of help. He rolled up his sleeves and dug in. Even after his mother passed and his father soon followed, Ethan stayed. He married young, but lost his wife, Maria, to cancer in his early 40s. They never had children. The only trace of her now was a wedding photo, the edges curling, tucked carefully under the glass of a dusty frame on the mantel. Time weighed on him differently now. He had aches in his knees that reminded him of every storm rolling in. But the bigger ache was the creeping sense of isolation that had settled over him, especially in the last decade. He still had a few neighbors, fellow farmers, scattered across the rolling fields of Redfield County, and an old pickup that carried him into town once or twice a week for supplies. The farmland was his heart, the sprawling acres a testament to his family's perseverance. He managed a small but varied operation, a modest cornfield, a few dozen chickens, and a couple of dairy cows. The revenue kept the lights on, but more often than not, he'd be patching the roof with his own calloused hands or repairing the tractor from spare parts he scavenged at auctions. A late autumn storm was brewing tonight. He could feel it in the thick, humid air and in the dull ache that traveled up his knee. The weatherman said it might be a rough one, possibly the worst in several years. Ethan had stacked sandbags by the barn's leaky side and double-checked the feed. After rummaging through the old trunk that held tarps and rope, he made sure everything was secure. Lightning danced on the horizon, illuminating the farmland like a camera flash capturing the very soul of the place. The wind picked up, rustling the corn stalks. Any illusions of a calm evening vanished when the skies opened with a crack of thunder. He was about to retreat into the safety of the farmhouse when a primal instinct drew him to the window. Along the distant dirt road, he spotted a pair of headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. The headlights swerved before disappearing, as if something or someone had gone off the road. Alarm shot through Ethan. He reached for his jacket and flashlight, heart pounding with a purpose that felt oddly reassuring. The hush of the empty house was momentarily forgotten. He had a traveler to find, and no one in Redfield County, local or stranger, got left alone in a storm. Not if Ethan Hayes could help it. It did not take long for Ethan to navigate his old Ford pickup down the muddy path. Rain hammered the windshield with a relentless fury, forcing the wipers to squeal in protest. The glare of lightning revealed a sedan pitched into a shallow ditch. Steam billowed from under its hood, merging with the swirling rainfall in a ghostly dance. He pulled onto the roadside as safely as he could manage, flicked on his hazard lights, and grabbed his flashlight. When he stepped out, the storm nearly took his breath away. Wind whipped at his hat, and water poured off the brim in tiny waterfalls. He trained the flashlight on the stranded vehicle. Through the downpour, he spotted a figure inside a woman fighting the steering wheel, perhaps trying to restart the engine in vain. Her silhouette moved with a certain urgency that made Ethan quicken his pace. He sloshed across the ditch, calling out, "Ma'am, you all right?" The door creaked on, and the woman tumbled out with a sputter of coughs. She looked to be in her mid-30s, her stylish blazer and pencil skirt now plastered to her frame by the rain. She held up a trembling hand in greeting. I, I'm fine, she managed, though her voice wavered with shock. The car just went off the road. I didn't expect the storm to be this bad. Ethan offered a steadying arm. Highways flood pretty quicker around here, especially if you're not used to these back roads. I'm Ethan Hayes. She hesitated, glancing around as if expecting a hidden camera. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Charlotte Caldwell, she replied at last, hugging herself against the cold. The urgency of the storm allowed little time for niceties. Ethan popped the hood, shining his flashlight to assess the damage. Between the overheated engine and the ditch, her car wasn't going anywhere tonight. "You'll have to come back to my place," he said, raising his voice to be heard over the raging wind. "I've got a spare room. We can figure out the rest once this storm passes." Charlotte seemed reluctant, eyes scanning the deserted farmland. "Are you sure I don't want to trouble you? I can just call a tow truck." "Don't think a tow truck will make it out here till morning," Ethan interrupted gently. "Besides, it'd be plain wrong to leave you out in weather like this." He noticed she was shivering, her lips starting to turn a worrying shade of blue. He removed his coat, placing it over her shoulders, but the thing was already soaked. With an arm firmly around her, he guided her across the ditch, both of them nearly losing balance in the knee-deep mud. The wind howled. Lightning lit up her face, revealing a mix of fear and relief. As he helped her into the passenger seat of his truck, Ethan couldn't help noticing how out of place she seemed a city woman. Hair disheveled, water streaming down the lines of her expensive watch. In a different moment, he might have asked what on earth she was doing all the way out here. But for now, there was no time for questions. The farmland was being hammered by rain and wind, and they had to get to shelter before the road washed out entirely. Ethan started up the Ford and eased back onto the muddy path, headlights barely penetrating the tempest ahead. By the time Ethan pulled up to his farmhouse, the wind had reached a near hurricane roar, lashing the tall oak trees and scattering leaves across the porch. He hopped out, circled around, and helped Charlotte step onto the gravel driveway. The flicker of a porch light cast a warm glow, though it struggled against the storm's fierceness. His front door was just a few yards away, but it felt like crossing a battlefield. Rainwater soaked every inch of their clothes in seconds. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and the faint aroma of spice from the simmering stew Ethan had left on low. Before he rushed out, he slammed the door shut against the swirling gusts and locked it with a solid click. Charlotte stood, dripping onto his worn doormat, looking every bit the picture of a corporate professional undone by nature's fury. Ethan noticed her glancing around, taking in the rustic charm of the place, framed photos of family members wearing old denim overalls, crocheted blankets on a rocking chair, and a large American flag folded in a triangular case above the mantel, presumably from his service days. "Let's get you dried off," Ethan said, grabbing a clean towel from a cupboard near the laundry room. He offered it to Charlotte, who accepted it with a shaky smile. She tried to dab at her hair, but the water kept dripping. Her expensive shoes squelched uncomfortably, and Ethan had to suppress a small, sympathetic chuckle. He realized how overwhelming this must be for her. Over the rumble of thunder, Ethan gestured toward the living room. "You can sit there and warm up while I try to salvage some dry clothes for you. Might be big, but at least you won't catch pneumonia." Charlotte obliged, carefully removing her ruined heels. She lowered herself onto an old couch that sagged in the middle. The tension in her face gradually receded, replaced by deep exhaustion. She murmured a soft "thank you" as Ethan walked away. In his bedroom, he fished through a chest of drawers for sweats and a flannel shirt, items that once belonged to him and, long ago, to his late wife Maria. A pang of loss seized him for a moment as he remembered Maria's laughter, how she would bustle about handing out spare blankets to any neighbor who needed them. He swallowed the memory, returned to the living room, and handed Charlotte the clothes. While she changed in the nearby bathroom, Ethan stoked the embers in the fireplace, coaxing a fresh flame to life. He placed a few logs on the grate and waited until the fire crackled. The living room took on a welcoming glow, the kind that made the old family photographs sparkle with a new vibrancy. When Charlotte emerged, dwarfed in his oversized sweatshirt, Ethan couldn't help but notice how young she looked. That steely, corporate aura had slipped away. She clutched the sleeves nervously, as if feeling self-conscious. "I'm sorry about all this," she said, hovering near the doorframe. "I really didn't plan on interrupting someone's life tonight." Ethan shook his head firmly. "No need for apologies. This house could use a little life, and we'd be no kind of neighborly folk if we turned away someone in a storm." He motioned for her to sit by the fireplace, ignoring the way lightning flickered through the windows, each strike a reminder of the raging storm outside. Tonight, at least, they had warmth and shelter, and that was more than many souls might find on a night like this. The next morning brought evidence of just how violent the storm had been. Tree branches littered the driveway, and the dirt road that led back toward the main highway looked more like a muddy river. Large puddles had formed in the front yard, glimmering beneath a sullen gray sky. The weather forecast warned of lingering rainfall, but at least the winds had quieted. Ethan glanced out the window, trying to gauge how much damage had been done to the fields. Charlotte awoke to the creaking sounds of Ethan's footsteps moving around the kitchen. She'd spent the night in a spare bedroom, one that clearly hadn't been used in a while, but bore signs of Ethan's careful upkeep: clean sheets, a faint smell of cedar from a small closet. Stepping gingerly into the hallway, she found him pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs. He wore a faded flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms lined with scars both old and new. "Morning," he greeted, handing her a mug. "No sugar left, but there's a splash of milk in the fridge." She smiled her thanks. Taking a tentative sip, it was strong, earthy, a stark contrast to the frothy lattes she normally grabbed on her way to her downtown office. She felt a pang of dissonance. Her typical day involved early Zoom calls, acquisition strategy meetings, and a flurry of emails. Yet here she was, uncertain about how to navigate a muddy farmland. They settled into the small dining nook, the silence punctuated by the ticking of a vintage clock on the wall. Charlotte couldn't help but notice Ethan studying the stack of envelopes on the table, his brow furrowed. "Everything all right?" she asked gently. He grimaced. "Bills, mostly. Some overdue notices. Reminders that I'm behind on a loan. Typical story for a family farm these days." He hesitated, then slid the envelopes aside, as if they weighed more than they should. "I'd planned on making a run to the bank next week, see if I can negotiate some extra time." Charlotte nodded, guilt gnawing at her. If only he knew who she really was: a top executive of Caldwell Industrial Agriculture, the massive conglomerate currently sweeping across rural America. But she'd left behind that identity, at least for a little while, seeking solace on these roads. She couldn't bring herself to reveal her position yet, not when she felt so far removed from the polished CEO everyone expected her to be. "They're saying the roads might stay flooded for another day or two," Ethan said, sipping his coffee. "Even if you wanted to leave, I'm not sure you can just yet. Telephone lines are down, too. Power's still holding, but it could go any time." Charlotte nodded, setting her mug down. "I appreciate your hospitality, truly. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help out around here. I might not be much good on their front, but I can try." He chuckled. "You want to help, you might get your wish. I'll be going out to check the damage, feed the animals, see what needs fixing. It's not glamorous work, but it's gotta be done." And so, after she changed back into the partially dried blazer and skirt, still damp from the storm, Charlotte found herself trailing Ethan out into the muddy yard, stepping carefully to avoid deeper puddles. A crisp chill hung in the air, making her grateful for the borrowed jacket he insisted she wear. She looked around at the vast fields, dotted with debris. Somewhere in the distance, A lone cow bellowed. This wasn't the world she knew, but there was an earnestness here that tugged at her heart. The day's chores laid bare a side of farm life Charlotte had only read about in passing. She helped Ethan check on the chickens, their coop battered but still standing. Egg collection proved trickier than she imagined more than once. A flutter of feathers caused her to flinch and nearly drop an egg. Ethan offered a patient smile, retrieving the eggs from her trembling hand before they could fall. Next came the cattle, a pair of jerseys that eyed Charlotte with mild curiosity. The smaller one, Daisy, took an instant liking to her, nudging her arm as if to ask for a treat. Ethan chuckled at Charlotte's surprise. They know when someone's new, he said. Daisy's a sweet girl, though just watch your shoes if she steps forward. They spent the rest of the morning clearing fallen branches from the corners of the pasture, tossing them into a pile near the fence. Charlotte's feet were soon soaked again, her business attire becoming more caked with mud than she cared to admit. Yet she felt a sense of bizarre satisfaction every time a branch was hauled away, revealing a bit more of the field's open space. When the rain began to pick up again, they retreated to the barn to address a leak. Water dripped steadily from a loose patch in the roof, collecting in a bucket Ethan had set out. He climbed a rickety ladder, hammer and nails in hand, and carefully began patching the gap. Charlotte stood at the ladder's base, holding it steady, shoulders tensed. The barn smelled of wet hay and aging wood. Dust motes floated in the damp light, swirling around them like tiny ghosts. As Ethan hammered the final nail, Charlotte's mind drifted to her office in the city. She pictured the wide glass windows that overlooked a sea of skyscrapers, the sleek conference room where she negotiated the purchase of farmland after farmland. She pictured her father, Howard Caldwell, retired but still a looming influence, constantly urging her to think of the bottom line first. The guilt pressed against her lungs. Here was Ethan, balanced precariously on a ladder in a barn that had seen better days, about to lose everything if the next harvest didn't turn a profit, and her company had contributed to making that harvest even more precarious by driving up supply costs and controlling distribution channels. Ethan's voice startled her from her thoughts. All right, that should do for now, he called, climbing down. Might not be a permanent fix, but at least we won't have a swimming pool in here. Charlotte smiled back, handing him a rag to wipe the sweat off his brow. She couldn't help but notice how matter-of-fact he was about the whole process, no complaining, no bitterness, just acceptance that storms came and went, and the best you could do was patch what you could before the next blow. After a light lunch of sandwiches, her first real meal in over a day, they returned outside. The rain had stopped, giving way to a dreary afternoon sky. Mud squelched beneath every step as they continued assessing the damage. Through it all, Charlotte tried to reconcile the warmth she felt at Ethan's side with the secret gnawing at her very name. Charlotte Caldwell represented to many farmers exactly the kind of threat they feared. Late that afternoon, the old neighbor, Ruth Farnsworth, drove up in her battered pickup. She was in her 70s, sharp-eyed, and wore the same denim overalls she'd probably owned for decades. The moment she saw Charlotte, her eyes crinkled with curiosity, but she turned to Ethan first. Heard about the storm hitting your place, real bad, she said. You all holding up? We're all right, Ruth, Ethan replied, tipping his cap. Lost a few branches here and there, but the roof's still on. Charlotte here is stranded, so I'm putting her up until the road clears. Ruth flicked her gaze to Charlotte, scanning her from the mud-spattered skirt to the far too large flannel jacket. She nodded politely. Pleasure to meet you. Dear, name's Ruth Farnsworth. My farm's 2 miles west of here. Well, was my farm lost most of it back in '92. There was an odd glimmer in Ruth's eyes as she mentioned losing her land, but she kept her voice even. Charlotte felt a pang of unease, wondering if Ruth's story was another casualty of her own corporation's expansions. She forced a smile. Nice to meet you, ma'am. It's been an experience to see how farms run out here. Ruth drew a quick breath. Experience, huh? Well, living it sure is different from reading about it. She turned back to Ethan. I came by to drop off some fresh bread, since I got the oven going this morning. And to let you know, the county is sending out trucks to clear debris from the main road. Might take a day or two. Though, Ethan thanked her, taking the still warm loaf, its comforting aroma wafted through the damp air. Ruth lingered, studying Charlotte a moment longer. "You look like you're from the city," she finally said. "Not many folks from there come all the way out here just because—" Charlotte managed a quiet laugh. "I suppose I am. I, I needed a break from certain pressures. Ended up getting lost in the storm." A fleeting look of understanding crossed Ruth's face. "Well, sometimes running away for a bit is the only way to see things clearly." She gave a nod to Ethan and climbed back into her pickup. As she backed down the driveway, Ethan turned to Charlotte with a hint of a smile. "She's a good woman," he said. "Her family owned hundreds of acres once. But times got tough. Banks foreclosed. Big companies swooped in. She held on to a small patch she calls Farnsworth's Patch, like a memorial to what once was." Charlotte's stomach twisted. She made a mental note to search her company archives for Farnsworth Farm, see if Caldwell Industrial Agriculture had been involved. She suspected the answer was yes. They went inside to slice the bread and sample it with a bit of homemade jam. Over the modest meal, Charlotte's curiosity about Ethan's life grew stronger. She noticed the folded flag above the mantel, the battered dog tags hanging near a collection of older photographs. "You served?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded. "Signed up young, served stateside mostly. But the war was winding down anyway. Didn't see much action. Thank God. The training I got as a mechanic came in handy. This old place always something to fix." His eyes flicked up to a black and white photo, a younger version of him, hair dark and full, standing next to a striking brunette. "That's Maria, my late wife," he added quietly. "She was the heart of this house." A silence followed that felt both heavy and comforting. Outside, the sky remained a dull gray, but at least the wind had settled. For Charlotte, the farmhouse felt warmer than any high-rise apartment she'd ever entered. Yet underneath that warmth lay a tremor of guilt and looming confession, one she wasn't sure how to bring to light without shattering the fragile trust building between them. Night fell quickly, shrouding the farm in the kind of darkness that city dwellers rarely experience. Without streetlights, every object outside vanished in blackness. Only the faint glow of the moon, occasionally emerging from behind drifting clouds, silhouetted the barn and trees. Inside, Ethan lit a few oil lamps to conserve electricity. Wary that the power grid was still under stress from the storm, the living room turned cozy under the gentle flicker of lamplight. Charlotte and Ethan sat on opposite ends of a worn couch, nursing cups of hot chamomile tea. A battered radio played faintly on a side table, broadcasting weather updates and old country tunes in turns. "It's nice," Charlotte murmured, letting the warmth of the teacup press into her palms. "I mean, I can actually hear myself think out here." Ethan nodded, resting his arm along the couch's back. "Folks from the city often say that. Out here, you can't run from your thoughts. They catch up to you eventually." Charlotte considered her next words carefully. "I used to think I was doing something important in my job," she began, her voice hushed. "Building up farmland for more efficient use, feeding more people, you know. But over time, it started to feel impersonal, like it was only about the numbers, not about who those fields belonged to before." Ethan studied her with curiosity. "And that's why you came out here?" She nodded, swirling the dregs of her tea. "I needed to see farmland with my own eyes, not just in spreadsheets. I didn't expect to get stuck in a storm." "Of course." His gaze dropped to the floor. "Well, you're seeing real farmland. All right, the kind that's always on the brink. One bad harvest away from ruin." He set his cup aside, shoulders sagging as if an invisible weight pressed down on them. "I'm behind on payments. Another storm or drought could be the death knell. My neighbors are in similar spots, some worse." Charlotte felt her heart twist. She debated telling him everything that she was Charlotte Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Industrial Agriculture, the very conglomerate whose acquisitions had forced many farmers to sell, that her father had pioneered the strategy of buying underperforming farms cheap, merging them into mega operations, and reaping huge profits. She glanced at the photograph of Maria on the mantel again, recalling the gentle look in Ethan's eyes whenever he mentioned her. It reminded Charlotte that there were real people behind every bullet point in her corporate reports. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she couldn't say for what exactly. For the system that put him in this position. For her own role in sustaining that system, for her deception, Ethan didn't press. Instead, he rose from the couch, rummaged through a closet, and pulled out a thick quilt. "Nights can get cold here," he said, draping it over her legs. "I'll be in the bedroom next door if you need anything." Charlotte sank deeper into the couch after he left, the radio's static-laced broadcast mingling with the quiet hum of the old refrigerator in the adjoining kitchen. Guilt gnawed at her. Each passing moment made it harder to reveal her true identity. She stared into the lamplight, mind spinning with half-formed plans to help Ethan. But how could she help him without him feeling betrayed when he learned the truth? Outside, the wind sighed, a distant echo of the storm. She hoped sleep might bring a reprieve from the turmoil in her thoughts, but she suspected it wouldn't. Tomorrow, the questions would still be there, and the quiet farmland would insist she confront them head-on. Morning sunlight broke through a thinning layer of cloud, illuminating the farm with a subdued golden hue. Charlotte stepped onto the porch, the wood cool under her feet, and breathed in the crisp air. The intense storm had receded into memory, leaving branches strewn about like discarded toys. Thin tendrils of steam rose from puddles that dotted the yard. Ethan joined her, mug in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. "Those county trucks should be out today," he said. "Once they clear the main road, you might be able to head back." He said it with a forced casualness that made Charlotte wonder if he'd grown used to her presence or if he was ready to see her go. Before she could respond, an engine rumbled in the distance. A pickup pulled into the driveway, splashing mud. The driver was a wiry man in his 50s with a stoic expression. He introduced himself as Neil Patterson, a local farmer. "You all right over here, Ethan?" he asked, casting a glance at Charlotte. "Heard you had a city guest." Ethan exchanged a quick look with Charlotte, then explained how he had found her. Patterson nodded, apparently satisfied with the story. "Just came by to see if you needed anything," he said. "Ruth told me some of your fencing might be down." They headed out together, Charlotte following as they circled the perimeter. Indeed, sections of the old wooden fence had splintered under the storm's wrath. Patterson produced a toolbox from his truck, and the three of them spent the better part of the morning repairing what they could, hammering nails into half-rotten boards. It was grueling work. But Charlotte noticed how seamlessly the two farmers collaborated, no formalities, just mutual understanding. During a quick water break, Patterson turned to Charlotte. "Ever done fence repairs before?" She shook her head, letting a rueful grin slip. "No, can't say I have. It's eye-opening." He chuckled. "When you live out here, you learn 1,000 skills you never dreamed you'd need. But these are the days that bind us together. I suppose every farmer pitching in when a neighbor's in trouble." Charlotte felt a lump form in her throat. This sense of community, of looking out for one another, was precisely what her father's corporate model failed to grasp. In the boardroom, land was land, just data on a ledger. Yet out here, land was people's history, their identity, their entire sense of belonging. By noon, they had made enough progress to keep livestock from wandering off. Patterson pointed out a gap that required new lumber, which Ethan couldn't afford at the moment. Catching the discouragement in Ethan's eyes, Charlotte quietly made a note to see if she could cover it later, perhaps by leaving some cash behind without him knowing. But then she realized how patronizing that might feel like charity. Patterson bid them farewell, promising to check in again soon. Once he was gone, Charlotte and Ethan returned to the porch for lunch. She offered to cook, rummaging through the kitchen to whip up a simple vegetable stir-fry with the produce she found. Her father would have been appalled to see her struggling with a paring knife, but Ethan's grateful smile made it worth every awkward slice. They ate in companionable silence. Charlotte found herself daydreaming about what it would be like if she didn't have to go back to the city, if she could stay here and contribute in a meaningful way instead of orchestrating acquisitions. But that dream felt like a delicate glass ornament, easily shattered by reality. She forced herself to savor the moment, uncertain how many more like it she'd get. Word spread fast in rural communities, and by mid-afternoon, more neighbors drifted in to check on Ethan. Some brought planks for the fence. Others offered baked goods or canned soup. Charlotte stood by, watching a gentle flurry of activity that seemed almost choreographed. Elderly folks, middle-aged couples, even a few teenagers too shy to say much, but eager to help. One visitor, a white-haired woman named Agnes Wolcott, recognized Charlotte from somewhere but couldn't place it. "You look so familiar," she murmured, peering over her spectacles. Charlotte felt her heart skip. She mumbled something about traveling from out of state. Ethan subtly guided Agnes's attention away, sparing Charlotte from further scrutiny. Throughout these interactions, Charlotte sensed how deep the bonds ran here. The older neighbors reminisced about the good old days when farmland stretched unbroken. Families passed their property down through generations, and local fairs were the social highlight of the year. More than once, she heard mention of the new wave of corporate buyers, with half a dozen folks complaining about big money interests that don't know a darn thing about living off the land. Each complaint hit Charlotte like a stone. She felt a gnawing frustration at the unfairness of it all, how these folks had no idea the stranded city woman was actually one of the top players in that big money interest. It tore at her, especially now that she saw how tight-knit and vulnerable this community was. As the afternoon wore on, Charlotte retreated to the farmhouse, claiming a need for rest. Really, she just needed space to think. She found herself in Ethan's study, a small room lined with books about farming techniques, soil conservation, even some mechanical manuals. On a side table rested a leather-bound journal, pages yellowed with age. It bore the name Hayes Family Almanac. Curiosity got the better of her. She cracked it open and skimmed the handwritten entries. Scrawled in neat cursive were records of yearly harvests dating back decades, notes about rainfall, crop rotation, market prices. There were also personal anecdotes, joys and sorrows of each season, references to births and deaths in the local community. One entry in particular caught her eye. Dated 10 years earlier, bank threatened foreclosure again. Maria says we'll make it through, like always. She believes in me even when I can't believe in myself. A dull ache squeezed Charlotte's chest. Here were real lives, real histories, real heartbreak. She thought of her own father, Howard Caldwell, who taught her to regard farmland as a commodity. Statistics don't lie. Charlotte, he used to say, increase efficiency, slash kits, and profit grows. She remembered the pride she used to feel signing off on multi-million-dollar acquisitions. Now those deals seemed drenched in moral compromise. She heard the creak of a floorboard and looked up to see Ethan leaning against the doorframe. He gave a small, apologetic smile. "Sorry if I startled you. Thought you might be here." Charlotte closed the journal carefully. "Your family's really been here a long time, huh?" Ethan nodded. "My granddaddy built this place. My father kept it going. Now it's my turn, if I can hold on." He stepped closer, glancing at the journal. "I've been recording harvests in there since my 20s. Maria used to tease me for being so thorough. But it's like our family's living memory." Charlotte gently laid a hand on the worn cover. "It's beautiful, Ethan." Her voice trembled slightly. "Worth fighting for." His gaze held steady. "I'd like to think so." And for the first time, Charlotte sensed that perhaps he could see the turmoil behind her eyes, that she was wrestling with something bigger than just city versus country. She was wrestling with the possibility that everything she'd built her life upon was leading good people like him to ruin. When word came through that the county roads were clear enough to drive on, Charlotte felt a wave of conflicting emotions. She stood by the window, biting her lip as she watched Ethan load her still damp suitcase into his pickup. Part of her longed to remain cocooned in this rural sanctuary, to wake up each morning surrounded by fresh air and honest work. Another part understood that she couldn't hide forever. The corporate world she had left behind, albeit briefly, would be clamoring for her return. Ethan's expression was guarded. "I can take you into town. You can arrange for a tow truck to come get your car from the ditch later, or maybe they'll salvage it today if you give them a call." She nodded, feeling oddly shy. Right. Good idea. They drove in silence for the first few minutes, the farmland rolling by, glistening under patches of sunlight that broke through the cloud cover. The atmosphere was far from the raging storm of 2 days ago, but an emotional storm churned inside Charlotte's mind. She clutched her phone, which had found a weak signal earlier that morning. Several unread texts and voicemails from colleagues and her father blinked on the screen. She'd ignored them, not ready to face that reality. Ethan, she finally said, her voice catching. Before I go, there's something I need to tell you. He glanced over, eyes flicking from the road to her. All right, she hesitated, heart pounding so loudly she feared he might hear it. My name is Charlotte Caldwell. Yes, but I'm not just some random traveler. I'm, she swallowed hard. I'm the CEO of Caldwell Industrial Agriculture. The confession landed like a stone between them. For a moment, Ethan kept his gaze firmly on the road. Then his knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. Caldwell Industrial, he repeated, as if testing the words on his tongue. The big outfit that's been buying up farmland all over the state. Yes, she murmured. And others. We've expanded rapidly. I came out here to see what we're doing to places like yours, though I didn't expect to actually land on your doorstep. I, I'm sorry I didn't say anything. I wanted you to see me without all the corporate baggage. His jaw tensed, and he inhaled sharply, as if trying to rein in an outburst. So these last few days you were, what, researching? Charlotte's eyes stung. No, not exactly. I was trying to understand. I got caught in the storm by chance, I swear. But once I was there, I realized that my company's data doesn't capture the real heart of these farms. It misses the history, the people, everything that can't be measured in profit margins. He said nothing for a long while. The truck rumbling along the winding road, fields stretched on either side, drenched in the aftermath of the storm. Finally, he pulled over near a small clearing. Get out, he said, voice low. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. Ethan, please, just get out for a minute. I need some air, and I can't think clearly with you sitting right there. She obeyed, stepping onto the muddy shoulder. He followed suit, slamming the driver's door and stalking a few feet away. She stood, shivering in the damp wind, waiting for him to speak. The farmland they had both cherished so deeply now served as a silent witness to this unraveling. After what felt like an eternity, he turned to her, eyes full of hurt and confusion. Why me, he asked, arms crossed. Why my farm? It wasn't planned, Charlotte insisted, voice trembling. You have every right to be angry. But I swear to you, I came out here because I've grown sick of how Caldwell Industrial does business. I wanted to see it firsthand, maybe find a way to make it right. Ethan's gaze wavered, his anger tempered by a flicker of the empathy she'd come to admire in him. I don't know what to think. Charlotte, he said, I really don't. They stood there on the roadside, the breeze making the tall grass ripple around them. Charlotte wanted to reach out, to explain all that was churning inside her, but she sensed Ethan needed space. After a moment of silence, he walked back to the truck and leaned against it, arms still crossed. Let me drive you into town, he said at last, voice subdued. I'll drop you off. Then I need time to think. She nodded, swallowing hard. Climbing back into the passenger seat felt like stepping into a place that no longer welcomed her. The engine growled to life, and they continued along the winding road in silence. She glanced at him sideways, wishing she could see the gentle warmth he'd shown these past few days. But his features were locked in a mixture of betrayal and disappointment. Town was a modest collection of buildings: an old diner, a general store, a gas station with a single pump. Ethan parked by the diner, a faded wooden sign reading Redfield Eats, and turned off the ignition. You can call for a tow from here, he said. Maybe stay at the motel next door till your car's fixed or you figure out your next move. Before she could reply, Ruth Farnsworth emerged from the diner, squinting, spotting them. She ambled over, wearing her usual denim overalls. Well, if it isn't Miss Charlotte and Ethan, she greeted. Her gaze flicked from one to the other, immediately sensing the tension. Something happened. Ethan managed a tight smile. Just giving Charlotte a ride. She needs a place to stay in town now. Ruth's brows knitted. Oh, you're not keeping her on the farm any longer. That's not like you. Ethan, Charlotte mustered a hollow laugh. Stepping out of the truck, I think it's best I give him some space. He's been more generous than I deserve. Ruth eyed them both, her expression unsettled. The older woman's intuition seemed to pick up on the awkwardness. Well, come inside, both of you, she said. I'll buy you a coffee. You can at least get warm before you part ways. Charlotte glanced at Ethan, who shrugged and relented. Inside the diner, a wave of heat and the smell of frying bacon enveloped them. They slid into a booth near the window. Ruth left them briefly to chat with the waitress about coffee. In the short silence, Charlotte finally mustered the courage to speak. Ethan, I'm not just trying to fix my conscience here, she said, keeping her voice low. I want to do something real. I can't keep watching your community, and so many others get swallowed up. It's wrong, his eyes narrowed. And what's your plan? Use the same corporate machine that put us here in the first place. She shook her head. I have resources, personal ones. The board can't touch them. If I restructure Caldwell Industrial from the inside, or if I start an independent fund to help farmers modernize without losing ownership, there might be a way to balance efficiency and tradition. He exhaled a humorless laugh. Sounds nice on paper. But in reality, the board will never let you give up profits like that. They'll cut you out the first chance they get. Charlotte's shoulders sagged. They might, but I have to try. Meeting you changed something in me. Before he could respond, Ruth returned with a pot of coffee, pouring each of them a steaming mug. She lingered, gaze darting between them. You two look like folks who've seen a tornado from different sides, she said softly. Remember that after the storm. Sometimes you gotta rebuild from scratch. That's the only way you can be sure the foundation is right. Ethan stared into his coffee as if searching for answers in the dark liquid. Charlotte studied his profile, the lines of age that told of battles fought far from any city boardroom. She hoped her sincerity reached him through the walls his hurt had erected. In the neon glow of the diner sign, his face appeared tired, weighed by more than just a single storm. 2 days later, Charlotte was back in her high-rise office, the sleek windows reflecting a skyline that felt more menacing than inspiring. The moment she stepped off the elevator, her phone buzzed with text messages and voicemails. Her father, Howard Caldwell, had left several urgent messages. Call me now. Where are you? We have an emergency board meeting. She dropped her suitcase in her corner office and logged onto her computer. Emails flooded in, many marked urgent. The top message read, Acquisition deadline approaching Redfield County. Her heart skipped. Redfield County was Ethan's home. She clicked it open and found an itemized plan of how to buy up multiple smaller holdings in the area, including Farnsworth's Patch, Patterson's Place, and inevitably Ethan Hayes' farm. Her father phoned moments later. Charlotte. Finally, he barked. Where the hell have you been? I took a trip to see some of the farmland we're acquiring. A trip, he echoed. You picked a hell of a time. The board is restless. They say these expansions are crucial to our quarterly targets, but you haven't signed off. They're worried about pushback from small-town protests, not to mention the financing. Charlotte breathed in slowly. Dad, we need to reconsider how we're doing business. We're strangling local farmers, forcing them into foreclosure. That's not just bad PR. It's morally wrong. He let out a low chuckle. Morality, Charlotte. You're running a billion-dollar empire. This is about feeding the world efficiently. Sentiment doesn't help us scale. Are you forgetting everything I taught you? She fought the urge to hurl her phone. Instead, she closed her eyes, remembering the stoic resolve in Ethan's face. No, Dad, I'm not forgetting. But maybe it's time we learned from the farmers instead of bulldozing them. I want to propose a new approach. Silence crackled on the line before Howard spoke again, his tone icy. Fine. We have a board meeting in 2 hours. Present your new approach, then. but don't expect them to pat you on the back. Charlotte hung up, heart racing. She spent the next 90 minutes crafting a presentation that outlined a cooperative model, one where Caldwell Industrial would partner with farmers, providing modern equipment and distribution channels without stripping their ownership. Each slide carried the memory of Ethan's eyes, the farmland's resilience, and the neighborly spirit she had witnessed. At the meeting, the 12 board members gathered around a polished table in a room overlooking the city skyline. Her father presided at the head. Charlotte launched into her talk. She showed statistics on how small-scale farming preserves soil health better in the long run, how sustainable practices could yield higher profits if they marketed to specialty buyers. She highlighted community success stories. A wave of skepticism rolled through the room. The CFO murmured that the plan was too idealistic. Another director asked if she'd lost her mind. Her father watched quietly, jaw clenched. When she finished, the board erupted in questions. What about immediate returns? Will banks finance such a risky plan? Are you sure you're not letting your emotions interfere? Charlotte, she held her ground, firing back with data on premium pricing for ethically sourced produce, how consumer trends favored farm-to-table authenticity, but each attempt to meet them with logic felt overshadowed by a corporate culture rooted in short-term profits. Her father's final word was a condemnation. I appreciate your concern, but this board will not support a partnership program that deviates from our proven acquisition model. The Redfield buyout proceeds as planned. Meeting adjourned. Charlotte's chest felt tight. She had thrown her best arguments at them, but the board remained unmoved. Standing by the window, she gazed at the sprawl of the city and thought of Ethan, out there in Redfield, one step away from losing everything. This corporate fortress loomed, and she realized that if the board refused to budge, she'd have to fight them from outside or risk losing her own moral compass entirely. Meanwhile, Ethan was facing an ultimatum of his own. A final notice had arrived from the bank, a thin envelope that felt heavier than any storm debris he'd ever lifted. It announced the loan's due date 3 weeks from now. Failure to pay would trigger foreclosure proceedings. He stood in his kitchen, that same battered table strewn with bills, wondering if this was the end of the Hayes family farm. He considered calling Charlotte, but the bitterness in his gut held him back. Part of him still felt betrayed, yet another part replayed her words, how she intended to change things. He told himself it was just corporate talk. Still, a sliver of hope lingered that she might do something real. That evening, Ruth Farnsworth dropped by, delivering 2 jars of homemade jam. She noticed the grim expression on Ethan's face and pressed him until he confessed the looming foreclosure. She pursed her lips, grip tightening on the jam jars. This is exactly what happened to me, she said softly. Once you start slipping behind, it's like trying to stand on quicksand. Ethan managed a wry smile. I remember. Ruth, I tried to help as much as I could back then, but I guess no one can stop a wave like this on their own. Ruth sighed. I've heard rumors. Caldwell Industrial is sniffing around again, preparing to buy up everything they can in Redfield. I suspect they'd jump at the chance to scoop you up. Ethan exhaled, a mix of resignation and anger. Well, they can keep sniffing, but I'm not selling. Not willingly. Yet that night, he lay awake on the old couch. His bedroom felt too claustrophobic, staring at the ceiling. If foreclosure was inevitable, he wouldn't have much choice. Better to sell than to lose everything with no compensation. Images of Charlotte flickered through his mind, her awkward, mud-stained blazer, the earnest look in her eyes as she learned to gather eggs. He'd believed her sincerity once, could he believe it again? Now that he knew the truth, some nights, the only comfort Ethan found was in the old tapes Maria had made before she passed. She would record her voice, reading out loud from her favorite novels, knowing Ethan liked to listen when he was repairing equipment in the barn. Tonight, he popped one such tape into a dusty cassette player. Maria's voice, warm and reassuring, flowed through the speaker. The words she read were from a novel about home and belonging, a story that resonated with everything Ethan felt slipping away. He drifted to fitful sleep, lulled by Maria's voice, a ghostly reminder that the farm was more than a set of fields and buildings. It was a legacy of love, sweat, and persistence. Morning would come soon, and with it, more chores, more decisions, and more weight pressing on him to save what 3 generations of Hayes men and women had built. Across the miles, in her upscale apartment, Charlotte also lay awake, phone buzzing with new demands. Instead of sleeping, she combed through financial ledgers, searching for a loophole. If she couldn't convert Caldwell Industrial from within, maybe she could set up a separate entity, an agricultural preservation fund, financed by her own inheritance. She'd use her personal capital to offer farmers loans at manageable rates, modern equipment rentals, and marketing support, all without forcing them to sell. A radical gamble, but one she believed in. If only she could find a way to protect Ethan's farm before it was too late. 1 week later, rumors broke in the financial press Charlotte Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Industrial Agriculture, was privately funding a new farmer preservation partnership. Articles speculated she had gone rogue, acting against the board's wishes. Some analysts mocked her for romanticizing small-scale farming. Others called her a visionary. The board, blindsided, demanded an emergency session. Charlotte walked into the corporate boardroom with her head held high. Across the table sat her father, arms folded, his expression thunderous. She laid out her plan in a calm but firm voice. She would personally loan money to at-risk farmers, offering them modern irrigation and distribution channels in exchange for a collective pledge to meet certain sustainability standards, not sell their ancestral land. Caldwell Industrial could either endorse her plan or risk a public relations disaster if it tried to undercut her philanthropic initiative. Her father erupted first. "You realize this will gut our acquisition strategy. Charlotte, the board can't stand for this." She met his glare. "Our acquisition strategy is strangling communities and ignoring long-term viability. The future is cooperative, not predatory." Half the board argued that her private fund was none of the company's business. The other half insisted it was a direct conflict of interest. Tensions escalated, voices rising until the general counsel threatened legal action against Charlotte for violating her fiduciary duties as CEO. But Charlotte had come prepared. She displayed documents proving she was using her personal inheritance and trust fund, not corporate assets. "You can't stop me from investing my own money," she stated coldly. Then she played her trump card. "Any attempt to remove me will face immediate public scrutiny." I'm sure reporters will love hearing why Caldwell Industrial decided to sabotage a charitable endeavor that helps small farmers. Think about how our customers will react. The room fell into a strained silence. Her father shot her a look that was equal parts fury and reluctant admiration. Finally, the board agreed to table the matter. Charlotte left that meeting with a sense of grim triumph. She knew she had only bought time, but time might be enough to save Ethan Hayes' farm and others like it. Her next move was to hop a flight back to Redfield. She arrived late in the day, renting a modest car at the tiny regional airport. Dusk was settling by the time she pulled onto the familiar gravel road leading to Ethan's farmhouse. Her heart pounded as she climbed out of the car. The front porch light was off, but she saw a faint glow from the barn. Her footsteps felt weighted with uncertainty as she approached the open barn door. Inside, Ethan stood near a workbench, tinkering with a tractor part. The musty smell of hay and machine oil hung in the air. She paused just outside the threshold, trying to gather her courage. He sensed her presence, turning sharply. His expression registered shock first, then a guarded wariness. "Charlotte, what are you doing here?" She took a measured step forward. "I'm here to offer you something help, a partnership. Call it what you want." Her breath quivered. "If you'll still consider listening." For a tense moment, the only sound was the distant chirping of crickets. Charlotte's pulse hammered in her ears. She feared he might toss her out. But slowly, Ethan set down the wrench. "Well," he said, voice low, "I'm listening." Charlotte inhaled deeply, as though preparing to plunge into unknown waters. She pulled a folded sheaf of papers from her bag. "This is the framework for the Farmer Preservation Partnership I've set up. I'm funding it personally, my trust, inheritance, and some investments I liquidated. The idea is to give farmers a lifeline, fair loans, modern equipment, and market access enough to compete without selling. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, eyes never leaving hers. And Caldwell Industrial, they were just allowing you to do this. A wry smile tugged at her lips. They're tolerating it for now. They can't legally stop me, but they're itching to. If I lose my position, so be it. I'm not backing down. She extended the papers. I've singled out the first few farms we can help. Ruth Farnsworth's land is on the list. Neil Patterson's, a handful of others, and yours. He stared at the documents, making no move to take them. You think money alone can fix what's broken? The threat isn't just finances. Charlotte, it's the entire corporate mindset that farmland is something to be conquered and optimized. She sighed, I know. But we have to start somewhere, though. Maybe this partnership can show the board and the country that there's a better way. Farming can be sustainable, profitable, and community-driven. If you let farmers lead the way. Ethan's gaze softened with a flicker of the compassion she remembered. He finally reached for the papers, skimming the text by the beam of a hanging work lamp. The terms offered a low-interest loan tied to the condition that he maintain ownership, adopt certain sustainable techniques, and share machinery costs with neighboring farms in the program. No forced buyout, no surrender of generational land. This is generous, he admitted, glancing up. But why go to such lengths? What made you turn against your own company's strategies? She stepped closer, close enough to notice a faint streak of gray along his temples. You did, she said, voice trembling with emotion. Meeting you, living on your farm even for just a few days changed me. I saw what's at stake. Who's at stake? It's not just land, it's history, family, identity, everything the board dismisses as intangible. Emotions flickered across his face, relief, gratitude, maybe even a lingering hurt. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The barn's quiet wrapped around them, as if this was a sacred moment. Then Ethan cleared his throat. So, if I sign this, you'll help me stave off foreclosure. Keep the bank from taking everything. She nodded. Yes, there's a stipulation that if you default on the loan, you must allow the partnership to place a lien, but only at the value of the loan. You won't lose the entire farm. That's what happened with Ruth. She lost everything because of how her debts were structured. He looked down at the papers again, voice husky. Maria would have loved this. She always believed in banding together. He paused, swallowing a lump in his throat. But I need to know if I can trust you. Charlotte, not just your money, you. A surge of raw feeling welled up, her voice almost cracking. I'm not asking for blind trust. But I promise you, I'm done with the old ways. This is about building a future that honors the past. No more storms that we can't face together. Ethan reached out, gently brushing her hand with his calloused fingers. Together, he echoed, as though testing the word's weight. Then he exhaled, shoulders relaxing for what seemed like the first time in days. He stepped to a small side table cluttered with documents and rummaged for a pen. Charlotte's heart pounded, a mix of trepidation and hope. She felt the significance of this act, the forging of an alliance between two worlds that had always seemed at odds. She recalled the day she first saw him in the storm, how everything changed in the chaos of that night. Now, in the barn's hush, something new was being born, a shared vision that might yet mend the rift between corporate ambition and farmers' heritage. With a slow, deliberate gesture, Ethan signed the papers. Then he set them aside, turning toward her. I don't know if this'll save all of us, but it's a start, he murmured. And if you're willing to stand against your own board for folks like me, maybe we can find a way to make it work. Outside, the wind was quiet, the sky clear. Through the open barn door, moonlight touched the fields, reflecting on puddles that remained from the storm, a reminder of hardships endured. Yet the air felt lighter, brimming with possibility. Charlotte reached for Ethan's hand, lacing her fingers through his. This time, he didn't pull away. They stood there, gazing at the farmland that had been battered but not broken. It would always be tested by storms. But with any luck, they'd weather those storms together. Their partnership was not just a business deal, it was a choice to believe in a future that honored the soil beneath their feet and the communities that sprang from it. And for the first time in years, Charlotte Caldwell felt truly at peace, exactly where she stood beside Ethan Hayes in the quiet, resolute heart of Redfield County. Looking back on this story, I'm reminded that real strength isn't found in boardrooms or bank balances, but in the shared spirit of people who refuse to give up on one another. It's in the farmer who fixes fences under the rain, and in the executive who dares to question her own priorities. When two worlds collide, one rooted in family history, the other built on corporate ambition, surprising alliances can blossom, and healing can begin for everyone involved. I believe we all carry the power to change a piece of the world around us, if we choose to act with kindness, understanding, and courage. I hope this story has inspired you to see what can happen when hope meets determination. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know how you feel about their journey, and don't forget to connect so we can discuss and celebrate more stories like this one.